My name is Pavlo Chabin, and for 11 years, I served as Chief Procurement Officer for the Ministry of Regional Infrastructure. I wasn't the loudest voice in meetings, nor the one who pounded the table during negotiations. But I knew every clause in every contract, every loophole that vendors love to exploit, every comma that saved millions in public funds. Colleagues called me the firewall. I took it as a compliment. Integrity wasn't a branding slogan to me, it was an operating system. While others attended networking events or rubbed shoulders with contractors, I worked late auditing vendor bids line by line. I kept my office light on not because I wanted to be seen, but because I wanted to sleep well. In those years, I saved the ministry roughly 24 million hryvnias through renegotiated deals and canceled contracts that didn't pass scrutiny. My team, 5 sharp analysts and 1 clerk who'd been there since Soviet times, knew I'd shield them when politics interfered. I gave everyone the same rule: if it doesn't feel right, walk away and tell me. When my father died in 2017, I took only 2 days off. "What kind of machine are you?" my deputy whispered. I smiled but didn't answer. I wasn't a machine. I just didn't know how to stop doing the right thing. Looking back now, I realize the danger didn't come from the outside, from foreign contractors or opaque subsidiaries. It came from inside. From polished shoes and warm handshakes. From offers that sounded like compliments. From a single envelope left carelessly on my desk, folded once, thick enough to change someone's future. I didn't take it. And that choice set fire to everything. 3 days after I declined the bribe, I was summoned to the deputy minister's office. I wasn't surprised. The contractor, Vostolenergo, a major player in energy infrastructure, had hinted they hoped I'd see reason regarding their bid. I had already flagged their proposal for padded invoices and an unusually high logistics fee routed through a Cypriot shell company. They had 1-star engineer and 5 layers of obfuscation. Their bid was 20% higher than the next best offer, and I wasn't about to pretend it was competitive. The deputy minister greeted me with forced cordiality. Her name was Natalia Dyachenko, known in our circles for her curated smile and love of expedited deals. She gestured toward the chair. "Let's talk, Pavlo," she said, like we were old friends sharing secrets. "Vostolenergo's offer is non-compliant," I said, before she could steer the conversation. "They failed due diligence. The Cyprus link alone disqualifies them under Section 6.2 of." She held up her hand. "Pavlo, you're brilliant at details. But sometimes what matters is the big picture." I knew the pitch before she said it. Regional jobs. Political alignment. Deadlines. Strategic partnerships. Words that meant little and changed everything. "They left an envelope in my office," I said. She didn't flinch. So I filed a report." There was a long pause. Then a laugh, dry and sharp. "You filed a report," she repeated, as if I'd confessed to calling Santa Claus. "You really believe this system will protect you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next morning, an internal memo circulated. I was being placed on administrative leave, pending an audit. The official reason? Alleged procedural delays and potential bias in bid evaluation. The irony clung to my skin like grease. My team was disbanded by noon. Documents I'd locked in secure storage were gone. I asked for a copy of the audit report. None existed. My building access was revoked. My name vanished from internal systems. It was surgical. And then came the press leak. Local media ran a piece titled, "Ministry Official Under Investigation for Contract Tampering." They quoted unnamed sources alleging I'd sabotaged legitimate bids, possibly for competitors' benefit. My face was blurred, but my name wasn't. Overnight, I became the suspicious official, the perfect scapegoat in a system that fed on selective justice. I couldn't sleep. I replayed conversations, emails, everything. I hadn't made a mistake, at least not professionally. Personally, perhaps I had. I had believed that the rules, if followed with discipline, would protect me. That being clean made me untouchable. I didn't fight back, not yet. I consulted a lawyer. He reviewed the paperwork, what little I still had access to. "You could sue," he said. But you won't win. Not unless you have concrete evidence. Documents. Recordings. Witnesses who won't cave. I didn't. They had erased my trail. My phone stopped ringing. Colleagues avoided me. I applied for positions in the private sector, but the shadow followed me. No firm wants someone the ministry blacklisted. I sold my apartment 3 months later. Moved into a rented room above a dentist's office. I kept the lights off most nights. I couldn't bear to see myself in the mirror. Not because I was guilty, but because I had become invisible. And no one seemed to notice. But invisibility has its advantages. No one watches ghosts. So I started watching them. I spent nights reading budget allocations, tender databases, scanned reports, procurement portals. The public trail was faint, but it was there. Irregularities, fake bidders, shell companies winning millions in contracts. Many were familiar names from my own time at the ministry. Some were new. But all of them followed the same patterns I'd learned to spot like second nature. I opened a spreadsheet. 1 row. Then 10. Then 100. Within weeks, I had reconstructed networks of influence worth billions. Contractors awarded deals just under the mandatory audit threshold. Bidders linked by overlapping IP addresses. Suspicious timestamps on document submissions. It wasn't proof. Not yet. But it was more than anyone else had. One rainy afternoon, I met with an old friend, Mykola Savitsky, a soft-spoken transparency officer I'd once helped rescue from political exile during a scandal. We met in a coffee shop. I showed him the patterns. The spreadsheet. He stared at the data, then at me. "You're building a case?" he said. "No," I said. "I'm building something bigger." He frowned. "You'll go public?" "Not yet. Not until it's airtight. Not until I know the rules better than they do." "But they already ruined you." I looked out the window. A woman walked past, holding an umbrella against the drizzle. "That's the mistake," I said. "They think I'm ruined. But they only made me quiet." The idea came slowly, like frost creeping across glass. At first, I was only trying to make sense of the numbers, to understand how far the corruption stretched. But the deeper I went, the clearer the design became. These weren't isolated incidents or occasional abuses. This was architecture. A system built not to fail, but to hide failure inside acceptable margins. By the end of that year, I had reconstructed procurement anomalies across 9 ministries and 23 municipal departments. I didn't need access to internal servers. I had public ledgers, PDFs of bid documents, and APIs most people didn't even know existed. I wrote Python scripts to scrape procurement timelines, cross-match legal entities, and map directors across companies using a maze of registry data. My apartment looked like a conspiracy theorist's cave, walls pinned with flowcharts, photos, dates, overlapping arrows. But I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I was looking for leverage. Mykola helped me understand the broader landscape. Since my fall, new international grants had poured into Ukraine to fight corruption. The EU, OSCE, even private foundations were funding transparency initiatives. Most of them were bureaucratic showpieces, glossy reports and awareness campaigns that never touched raw data. But I didn't need a salary. I needed a vehicle. So I built one. I called it ILIA, Integrity, Logic, Impact, Accountability. It wasn't a nonprofit yet. Just a logo, a website, and a core idea: to use technical forensics to expose procurement manipulation at scale. Not anonymously, but boldly. With methodology, reproducibility, and open-source tools anyone could use. I used my own case as the foundation, a cautionary tale, but also a spark. Within months, the site drew attention. A law professor in Lviv emailed to ask if she could cite our data in her curriculum. A former advisor from the Anti-Corruption Bureau called to meet. I spoke at a small panel during a transparency workshop in Dnipro. My slide deck was plain: graphs, node networks, anomalies. No slogans. Just patterns that made silence uncomfortable. Then an invitation arrived from a German foundation hosting a summit in Berlin. They'd read my report on micro-threshold disbursement chains and wanted me to present. I borrowed a jacket, printed business cards, and flew out. I spoke in front of 70 people, auditors, lawyers, journalists, watchdogs. I expected polite nods. Instead, I got offers. By spring, IA had an operating budget of €62,000, 3 part-time analysts, and 2 interns. I rented a modest office, a converted apartment with creaky floors and terrible heating. But it was enough. The system noticed. The first message came from someone I remembered, Ivan Lysenko, a fixer who once escorted contractors through backdoor approvals. He invited me for coffee to reconnect. I declined. Then came an email from a firm I knew was linked to a former deputy minister. They wanted to sponsor research. No strings, just goodwill. I declined again. Weeks later, I came home to find a gift box at my door. Inside was a vintage Montblanc pen and a handwritten note. To the one who sees too much. We hope you learn to close your eyes. No signature. But it wasn't fear they were offering. It was doubt. And then came her. Her name was Yelizaveta. She showed up at an open training we hosted for municipal officers, tall, sharp, disarmingly witty. She asked clever questions, stayed late, offered suggestions. A few days later, she emailed asking for coffee to discuss potential collaboration. I agreed. She said she wanted to learn the methodology, maybe even volunteer. She was brilliant. She made dry data sound like drama. She suggested tweaks to our verification protocol I hadn't considered. Within a month, she was leading small sessions and producing her own reports. I trusted her. And then one evening, as we worked late analyzing a tender from Odessa's maritime board, she paused and asked softly, "Why are you still doing this, Pavlo? Why not just move on?" I looked at her, puzzled. This is moving on. But it's endless. You fight one shadow, 10 more take its place. You could consult abroad, live well, leave this behind. I smiled. They already tried to buy me. Now they're trying to soften me. You're the soft method, aren't you? Her eyes didn't flinch. I wanted to believe you meant this, I said quietly. But I always knew I needed to test that belief. She stood, took her bag, and left. She never came back. But weeks later, one of our email inboxes was flagged in an attempted phishing attempt. We tightened protocols. We kept moving. By then, I'd filed formal white papers with 3 parliamentary committees. I presented evidence of ghost bidding practices in Kiev's transport board that aligned with known shell firms. The documents weren't emotional. They were surgical. If they wanted to discredit me again, they'd have to attack math. The turning point came when a mid-level MP named Tatiana Rzetska invited me to a closed-door roundtable. She chaired a subcommittee on digital procurement reform and had quietly followed ILIA's work for months. We need to build ethics into process, she said. Not just punish corruption, but preempt it. She offered us something no one else had, a testbed, a pilot program, 3 cities, full access to procurement streams, staff training, and data sharing agreements. We'd monitor tenders in real time and suggest intervention points before corruption occurred. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about revenge or even redemption. This was reform. We began the pilot in Poltava. It wasn't the largest city or the most notorious for backdoor deals, but it had just enough complexity and just enough political will to serve as the proving ground. The mayor's office gave us clearance, conditional access to procurement platforms, and the names of their compliance officers, many of whom looked at us with the quiet panic of people who'd seen too much and said too little. I embedded one of our analysts, Ol, in the city's IT procurement department. She had a background in cyber forensics and a disarming way of asking uncomfortable questions. Within 3 days, she'd found that the city's last 3 tech tenders had been awarded to a firm that shared IP logins with one of the tender evaluation committee members. Another analyst, Dimitro, focused on construction projects. He flagged a pattern where multiple bids were submitted within minutes of each other from companies with matching legal templates, suggesting the same person had authored them all. We didn't issue accusations. We issued alerts, data-backed, process-oriented, neutral. Anomalous clustering detected in submissions, or cross-entity relationship detected, recommend third-party review. It wasn't drama. It was engineering. And it worked. City officials grew cautious. Bids grew cleaner. Contractors started calling us instead of the mayor's aides, asking for clarification on compliance standards. The usual whispers of sabotage or obstruction never came. Instead, there was curiosity. 3 months in, we expanded to Khmelnytsky and Rivne. The results held. Tender processing time dropped 11%. Post-award amendments fell by 43%. The biggest surprise? Budget efficiency improved. Not through cost cutting, but through prevention of cost padding. Word traveled fast. Within 6 months, we were invited to a closed symposium with deputy ministers, where I gave a presentation called The Architecture of Integrity, Building Ethical Systems That Resist Corruption Before It Starts. It was the most watched internal ministry talk that quarter. Not because of me, because of what we showed. Real-time dashboards, vendor conflict analysis, behavioral tender modeling. I watched their faces as we demonstrated our tools live. You could see it, the click of realization. For years, these officials had relied on compliance officers who flagged issues after the damage was done. We were offering predictive control, not reactive cleanup. Not everyone liked that. Shortly after, anonymous complaints were filed with our donors. ILIA lacks transparency, conflict of interest, data manipulation concerns. Nothing specific, just smoke. Our funders requested internal reviews. We passed them all, but the pressure was clear. Then came a different kind of attack. One evening, returning from a training session in Sumy, I arrived at my apartment to find the door ajar. Nothing was stolen, but my papers had been touched. The files on my desk reordered. A small sign that said, "You're being watched." No signature. No fingerprints. Just a message. I didn't report it. Instead, I installed cameras. Upgraded encryption. I knew what this was, pressure not to stop, but to blink. We didn't blink. In the second year of operations, we were invited to submit a proposal for a full national implementation roadmap, a phased integration of our tools into every ministry's procurement pipeline. I spent nights drafting the protocol. It was technical, demanding, and entirely disruptive. Before the proposal was reviewed, I was asked to meet with 2 senior government consultants, both ex-officials who now ran private, policy advisory firms. We met in a glass cafe near the cabinet building. They smiled, friendly, practiced. "We think your system has promise," one said, "but your approach is too rigid." "You mean clean?" I replied. They laughed. "No one wants to stop you. But if you're going to change the system, you'll need allies. People who can open doors. Smooth things out." I asked what that would cost. They quoted a number. 7 digits. Not for me, but for facilitation, they said. For lobbying. For greasing the hinges. I stood. I built this because I believed I wasn't alone. If I pay now, I prove I was. I walked out. A month later, a subcommittee of Parliament adopted our roadmap in draft form. No bribes. No intermediaries. Just votes and verification. That same week, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in 3 years. Deputy Minister Natalia Dyachenko. She spoke in a measured tone, no hostility, no warmth. "You've built something serious," she said. "You're on everyone's radar." "I hoped so," I said. "I have a proposal." "Another envelope?" I asked. She laughed softly. "This time, we'd like you to help train the Ethics Commission for the new National Procurement Board." I was silent. "You'd be training ministers," she said. "Directors. Deputy heads. We need this institutionalized, Pavlo. Not just monitored. Internalized." I didn't answer right away. I remembered the envelope. The fabricated charges. The silence of the colleagues I trusted. I remembered walking home past locked offices and seeing my name scraped from the directory. And then I remembered something else. My first intern, now leading our analytics unit. Now mentoring a new batch of city compliance officers. A public official in Poltava who told me she'd used our tool to prevent her own cousin from winning an unfair bid, and thanked me for saving her family. I took a breath. Only if I write the curriculum. You will. And I don't train them to be cleaner versions of the same machine. I train them to rebuild it. There was a pause. Deal, she said. The first session was in the West Wing of the Presidential School of Public Administration. 12 government officials sat before me, 3 ministers, 5 deputy heads, and 4 agency directors. Each wore the mask of importance. Some took notes. Some scrolled on phones. A few tried not to look bored. I began not with statistics, but a question. How many of you, I asked, have ever signed a document you knew wasn't clean, but did it because saying no wasn't an option? Silence. I waited. One deputy minister shifted. Another leaned back. The room was still. I walked to the board and drew a circle. This is not a system, I said. It's a pattern. And patterns can be predicted, intercepted, even broken, if you understand their logic. Then I showed them what we'd built. Live dashboards of procurement trends across ministries. Cluster maps of vendor connections. Heat signatures of bidding behaviors that suggested collusion. Every graph came with a name, a contract, a signature. Not one person in the room could claim ignorance anymore. Their faces changed. That evening, a young official approached me as I packed up. I had no idea this level of tracing was possible, he said. I signed one of those contracts last year. I didn't even read it. I looked at him. Read the next one. And if it smells wrong, ask why. The next 2 weeks were a cascade of breakthroughs. Ministries that had quietly ignored our reports began responding. One revoked a tender mid-process after we flagged a suspicious bidder cluster. Another blacklisted a shell company that had won 46 contracts in 2 years under 5 different names. But the most dramatic shift came from within the Ministry of Regional Infrastructure, my old department. They announced an internal ethics review. And then a name appeared on the suspension list, Natalia Dyachenko, the same deputy minister who had orchestrated my downfall. Accused of abuse of authority and manipulation of public procurement processes. Anonymous whistleblowers had submitted supporting evidence. But I knew who it was. One of my former analysts. She had waited, collected, verified. Quiet as I had once been. News broke fast. Media headlines screamed. Top official suspended amidst procurement ethics probe. I didn't cheer. I sat at my desk in the office, stared at the report, and felt something different. Relief. I hadn't taken her down. The truth had done that, slowly, like erosion, but irreversibly. Days later, I was asked to testify before the Parliamentary Commission on Transparency Reform. My name, once tied to scandal, now opened doors. I walked into the hearing chamber with no prepared speech. I spoke from memory. I was accused of obstructing progress. I began. But the real progress is not in speed. It's in integrity. We've spent decades optimizing contracts, budgets, metrics, but without ethics, they are empty math. A nation doesn't need perfect officials. It needs decent ones with tools that punish dishonesty and reward clarity. They listened. After my testimony, I received a message from someone I hadn't heard from since the start. Mykola Savitsky. He'd just been appointed as the new commissioner for public oversight. He wanted to build an internal anti-corruption algorithm using ILIA's methodology. I invited him to the office. He smiled when he entered. "You turned a spreadsheet into a firewall," he said. I nodded. It was always meant to be a firewall. Not for me. For the system. But the real victory came weeks later, when I received an official government request to co-author a national integrity framework to be embedded into all public procurement training. No handshakes. No envelopes. Just a contract. Transparent. Signed by the Prime Minister. I sat alone in the quiet of my office, fingers resting on the keyboard, unable to type. Not because I didn't know what to write, but because I finally understood what it meant to win. Not to destroy those who wronged you, but to build something so resilient that they could never do it again. 3 years ago, I left the ministry under a storm cloud of suspicion, silence, and exile. I had no allies, no position, no voice, only the unshakable conviction that I had done the right thing. That conviction at first felt like a curse. It cost me my job, my reputation, and for a while, even my sense of self. But principles, I've learned, are like seeds. They don't bloom overnight. They require isolation, pressure, and patience. And when they finally rise, they do so with roots that reach deep enough to withstand any storm. Today, I no longer work behind closed doors. I lead open workshops where government trainees write their own ethics codes, line by line, until they understand the weight of every word they sign. I stand in front of rooms where ministers and mayors ask questions not to challenge the truth, but to understand how to serve it better. I've trained over 400 officials in ethical procurement strategy. Our dashboards are now integrated into 4 ministries. ILIA has grown into a national platform with international advisory status. I've received awards, but I keep them in a drawer. The real recognition comes when a public officer calls to say, "We stopped a fraudulent bid today, thanks to what we learned." Occasionally, I'm invited to speak at conferences abroad. They call me a whistleblower, a reformer, a systems thinker. I don't correct them. But inside, I still see myself as what I always was, a civil servant who didn't bend. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I walk past the old ministry building. Its facade hasn't changed, still gray, still imposing. I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. That place taught me what systems are capable of, both the damage they can do and the hope they can carry when rebuilt with purpose. I've also come to understand this: justice isn't loud. It doesn't always wear robes or wield gavels. Sometimes, justice is a single clause in a contract rewritten, a tender rejected, a culture reshaped, one line item at a time. When people ask me if I'd make the same choice again, refusing the bribe, walking away, enduring the exile, I tell them yes, without hesitation, because dignity isn't transactional. It's foundational. And in a world that often underestimates the quiet ones, the auditors, the analysts, the policy writers, this is the truth I now carry forward. If you do not compromise yourself, you cannot be compromised. And if you build your legacy on truth, then not even silence, power, or time can bury it.